Hi there, my name's Colin Casey, and over the next 20 or 30 minutes I shall be taking you through a brand new feature of Connect 2019.1 that we call Project Wizards. Project Wizards were originally created for new users, first-time users, but novice users and even advanced users might get some value from them, so it's well worth taking a look. To start a Project Wizard, it's very easy. You just need to go to the home page, select the new menu item called Project Wizards, and from there you'll see a Create Project page on which there will be 6 projects that you can choose from. 2 of them are print, 2 of them are web, 1 of them is email, and the final one is Capture on the Go. We're going to go through them all, but I'm going to start with the print promotional job. To select the print promotional job, I just need to hover over the icon and click the button, and then I will get my menu for this specific project. There's not much to fill in. The first parameter is the project folder. Very simply, where do you want the project resources to be stored and where do you want your workspace to exist? This can be changed, but I'm going to leave it to the default setting. The second option is whether or not to send the templates and resources to workflow. By default, leave this checked, but that assumes you're running in a non-production environment. When you send the resources to the workflow, any resources with the same name will be overwritten. So make sure that you don't have this ticked or checked if you're running on a computer system with a live operation running. The main parameter for this project is the output preset, and we can see here that there are 6 of them, 2 PDF, 2 PCL, and 2 PostScript level 3s, each with and without something called virtual stationery. For those that don't know what virtual stationery is, it's simply a PDF instead of your letterhead that would normally be physically located in your printer. So with PDF, with virtual stationery, the PDF is combined with the job, which means when I show you the output, you'll be able to visually see the end result as you would expect to see it, at least in the presentation. When I've got my parameters set, I just need to click on Finish. Now, when I've done that, it won't take more than a few seconds, and then what will happen is I will get a new folder popping up. Now, the new folder has popped up on my other screen, so I'm going to bring it across, and what you can see here is 2 subfolders. The first one is the configuration folder, and in here I have everything I need. I've got my sample data in my data file. I've got the resources, the default resources, including all of the presets, the data mapper, the data models, and the templates, which you don't need to touch unless you want to make changes or create your own at a later stage. And then finally, we have the workflow folder. All I need in the workflow folder is to double click on the workflow file that's there, and that will then bring up the workflow with the configuration that was created by the Project Wizard. What you just saw flashing across the screen was the resources being published to the workflow. And what that essentially means is everything you need is all ready to go. If I look at this process, it's very, very simple. It basically is made up of 3 steps. The first one is folder capture. The second one is an all-in-one plugin, and we'll go through that in a second. And the final one is send to folder. So what this process is going to do is going to wait for a sample data file, create some output, and place the result in a folder. And you may be able to see that %m and underscore %y is a variable which stands for the current month and the current year. So the folder that we produce will be dynamically named based on the time that the demo or the operation is taking place. If I double click on the all-in-one plugin, then what we have here is a number of items. We've got the data mapper, which we need for converting our input data into the unified data model that Connect uses. And the data mapper has already been pre-selected from the resources that we published automatically. If I go to the content creation stage, the letter is already selected, and again it was produced and published by the wizard. We don't need job creation in this case because it's just one job. And if I look at output creation, this is where I selected my PDF with virtual stationery. You can see that other ones exist and they've already been pre-populated and sent to workflow, and if I want to change them, I can change them by just selecting a different one in this menu. That's all I really want to show you. I want to move from here to the live operation. So I'm going to close that window down, and now I want to explain the difference between the graphical user interface that we're currently using and you're currently seeing to the live operation. The first thing you need to know is the workflow generates a service which is currently not running. So I'm going to start the service, which essentially is workflow running in the background, lights out. Now, once I've started that service, it's really important that I find this icon up here called Send Configuration. Now, in order to make my current demo, what you're seeing, run as my live service, I need to click this button, and when I do that, the services will be stopped, the configuration will be updated, and then restarted. And what that means is I can now run this workflow live. Now, to do that, I just need to minimize the folder. I'll just minimize the background screen here. And another of the options in the promotional print job was something called Workspace. I have an input folder. That's the folder that's being monitored by the workflow. And I have an output folder, which is the one where the results need to end up. But before I can start any of this, I need some data. And if you remember, the data was in my resources or configuration subfolder. So I'm going to copy my data file. I'm going to go back to my workspace. I'm going to select my input folder and I'm going to paste my file. Now, when this happens, the file should disappear within 4 seconds. That's because the scheduling of the process makes that something that we want to do. Now, when I've lost my file, I can move to my output file and I then have to wait just for a few seconds for the output to arrive. And it shouldn't take very long. Good. Okay, here it is. And as you can see, there's a folder called June_2019, which means this presentation has been recorded in June. If I look inside the folder, there's a file. This is the file produced by the all-in-one plugin or task that you saw. And if I open up this document, I'll get a PDF, which I can view as a single page item nicely like this. And now you can see my sample data merge with my pre-printed stationery or my virtual stationery, and combined with some dynamic content in the middle with also a variable signature. Now, as I navigate through these pages, you will see them change. So here, the paragraphs are moving slightly, the signatures are changing, and the details, the variable data is changing too. So this is a very simple job that basically is demonstrating a data file being combined with content in a fully automatic way to produce a very, very dynamic letter that you would then be able to use to send out a promotional print job. So that's the print promotional wizard. Very simple. Don't forget, of course, that you can go back, edit and modify those resources to simply do your own thing. So consider this project wizard as a great way to understand how all of that works, and it's your start for learning and doing more. Okay, so now we're back to the create project screen, and so what I'm going to do from here is select the print transactional job. Now, the print transactional job doesn't have much to configure. It's simply the project folder where the configurations and the workspace will be created, and it also has the option to send templates and resources to the workflow, which again, if you're running locally and not in a production environment, this is safe to leave enabled. If I click finish, it will produce my project folders and they will appear in the screen. Now, all I have to do in here is go in and just make a copy of my sample data because I'm going to need that later on. And then when I've done that, you can see here that it's also got resources, all of the relevant output presets, and also the workflow. So I need to open up the workflow, which I can do just by double clicking on it, and then the workflow will load. Once the workflow is loaded, all I have to do is to publish this configuration to the service and then start the service. Now, to explain what this process does, it basically can be followed step by step. So the first step is to capture data from a folder. That will be our sample data. Then we're going to extract from that sample data the data that we need to produce the content. We're basically going to produce internally formatted PDF documents of that content based on the template design, which is effectively included within this resource set. And then obviously from the data, we're also going to create a job. In this case, it's just going to be a single job. Now, once that's done, the single content and the single job will be used to produce 3 different types of output. So the first output will be a single PDF containing all 50 of the invoices. Okay, fairly straightforward. But on top of that, we can then go down and use another output preset configured in a different way, but included in the resources. And this will basically merge all customer invoices into a single PDF based on the customer name. So if there's, for example, one customer with a customer number that has multiple invoices, they'll be all included into the single PDF. At the same time, we're basically going to finish up by doing the same thing but based on the invoice number. So if there's multiple documents with the same invoice number, then they're all going to be grouped into the same document. So let's take a look at this running live. First, I just need to minimize my workflow. Then I need to go to my workspace folder, go to my input folder, and paste my file. Now, when I paste my file, it should disappear within 4 seconds. And when I go back to my output folder, I should see some output appearing. So the full job arrived first because that was the order we told it to produce them. Then the customer invoice arrived, and then the per invoice arrived. So let's look at the full job first. What we can see here is I have a 50-page document, and it actually contains 50 unique one-page invoices. So I'm just going to jump through, not all of them, but some of them. And as you can see, I'm just jumping through the document. The information is flowing up and down as you would expect it to do. If I close that down and now I go back and I look at per customer, I'm just going to sort them by file size to make sure the biggest is at the top, because this is more likely to include multiple pages. So my customer number here ends in 51234. So if I open up this document, you can see I've got 4 pages. And if I fit to page, you can see that my customer number matches 51234. And if I go to my successive pages here, the customer number is the same, but it's a different invoice number, and so on. So you can see we've basically used our output presets to control the way the documents are grouped together and produced into output files. I can go back and look at the per invoice. And again, let's see if we can try the same trick. They all seem to be pretty much of a muchness. That's because no 2 invoice numbers should be identical, which is why in the invoice folder, I've got 50 documents instead of 38. So here I'm going to open up a PDF, and I would expect a single invoice to be there where the name of the file matches the name of the invoice number in the data. That is the print transactional job process. Okay, back to the create project page. This time I'm going to do something slightly different. We're going to go to our first web page project, serving a web page. Again, very little, if anything, to configure. I'm just going to use the defaults, click on finish, and that will now produce a workflow with the configuration folder and the workspace. And in my configuration folder, I've got data. Data here is a little bit superfluous because unlike the previous processes, we don't need to drop a file in a hot folder. You'll see what I mean when we get into the details. There's resources, which are the web page designs and data models that we need to build those things up. And then also I have my workflow. So if I just open up my workflow, I'll explain exactly what I mean by no data required. Okay, it's a simple workflow, not doing much at all. But you'll notice this kind of strange thing at the top called Node.js server input. What that effectively means is my workflow process, and obviously my service after I publish it, will be effectively waiting for a web URL to land at this endpoint. This endpoint, in my case, because I'm running on this localhost machine, will be effectively localhost with the port number /hello, which is the action. Now, when that happens, it will cause Connect to do a data mapper on that simple URL. It won't really get much back, but we'll explain more about that in a second. And then once it's done the data mapper, it will pass that information to a page that will produce some dynamic content. So let's take a look at what that means. But before we do that, we have to publish the workflow. This means that this process, when it's finished, will basically be running. And that means I can use a web page, which I'll launch here, to effectively demonstrate the project. So I'm bringing my web page over. Now, all I have to do is type in http://localhost. Okay, I need a port number, which for Node.js on our demo system by default is 1990. And then I just need to type in hello. Now, if I get this right and I click the key, I expect a page to be sent back to me. So if you can imagine that process, I hit the URL, it was processed, and a page was produced, and here's the result. The default name in this case is John Doe because I didn't tell it anything different. The page is sort of interesting. It's just got some static text, but we've also got some example URLs, and I can actually select these directly here. And when I do, you can see at the bottom, the URL will go back to the same process, but this time I've got the name parameter, which makes up the data that the data map will pass to the form to produce a slightly different output. So if I click on this, what we expect is Albert. Now, if I want to do my own, I can basically go back to here and actually start playing with the URL directly. So if I type in the word Colin space Casey and I press enter, then my name appears. So the point about all of this is that we now have a workflow process that is capable of receiving a URL with parameters, and based on the URL that it gets, it can produce a personalized page back to the person that entered the URL. Now, it's really important that Planet Press workflow generally sits behind a firewall, behind some other web server, and what happens is another web page might have a link or some menu options that results in this URL being triggered under the hood, going through the web server, through the firewall to our workflow. And then when that happens, Planet Press workflow will respond by sending this page back the same way it came to the original user. So that's how we can be used to serve a simple web page. Okay, now we're back at the Create Project page again. This time we're going to get a little bit more sophisticated by using the Submitting Data with Web Forms project wizard. Again, not too much to configure, so we're going to go straight into it by clicking the Finish button. And like before, I have a new folder with my configuration. There is a data file. We've got the resources similar to the previous one, but not the same by far. Most importantly, the workflow is very different. We'll see that it's more complicated. So why is it more complicated? Well, basically, the first thing you'll notice at the top is we have another Node.js server input, but this time there seems to be two names. One is called form and one is called thank you. That's because we're going to use this single process to handle two URLs from a web session. Now, what we can do when we get anyone, we need to check, well, which one was it? Was it the form or was it the thank you? And if it was the thank you, it's simply going to drop down and produce the content on this branch. If, of course, it was the form, i.e. someone's tapped in some information, then we need to come across and do more. We want to take that data and we want to write it into a database. That's what we mean here by pushing to the repository. Once the data has been written into the database, we can come back to the branch, we come back down, and then we can take the data out and produce, let's say, a more interesting web page back to the user. So let's take a look at what that looks like by first publishing this graphical user interface, this configuration to the service, and then we'll pull up a browser and we'll start all over again. The one that triggers this one is the main form. So actually, I'm just going to use the same page here because most of it's there, and all I really need to do is type in the word form. Now, this time I get a little bit more. So I've got a web form with some data, and I've got 4 input fields. The first one is a simple text field, so I can remove this. This is me trying to do a demo. So that's my text. I then have a drop-down box, which allows me to select courgettes or cucumber. I think today I'm going to select courgettes. I don't actually like them, but that's neither here nor there. I'm then also going to select carrots in my radio buttons, and I want to check this box to make sure that maybe at the back end it can be used to trigger another option, or at least populate this information into a database. Now, when I click submit, this will send the information in this form back to the process that will then hopefully write it into a database. But more importantly, it's pushed that data into the form, the response back. So it shows me my information that I've typed in. And if I scroll down a little bit, you can see that based on my selections, courgettes and carrots, it gave me some additional information. So this is a way of showing that we can produce dynamic content based on the input from a form. So this is very important concept to grasp, and actually very important to learn how to do, which is why the project wizard is a very good place to begin. If we go back to the workflow, this is what happened, but you'll notice it said push to repository. So I just want to show you, if I go to tools and I go to data repository, I actually have a web form table down here. And if I look at the last one at the bottom, you can see I've done it a few times before. This is me trying to do a demo with courgettes and carrots. And there's the option checkbox. So you can see here, we've not only produced the content from both branches in response to the URLs produced, but we've also added the information into a database. Obviously, you could use another action task, which we've got for writing data into a generic database, ODBC, SQL, or other. But ultimately, this process is a very quick way to show you how we can capture data, push the data into a database, and at the same time provide responsive back to the user. Okay, back at the create project again. This time we're going to select the email project. Now the email project has a little bit more to configure. So as before, there's a project folder. As before, there's send templates and resources to the workflow. But now, because we're sending email, we need to give some consideration to how we're going to send email. And what Connect tries to do is to send out emails using SMTP. So obviously it needs a sender's email address, especially for running in test mode. It needs a mail host URL. It needs to know whether you want to use TLS encryption or not, and also authentication or not. If you want authentication, as I'm doing here, then you need to obviously enter your username and password. One small point, if I need to change the port for any number of reasons, then basically I just need to put a colon after the URL and, for example, put 587, which I might do if I wanted to turn on TLS, because TLS typically uses port 587, whereas other systems without TLS will use the default port, which is 25. So I'm going to take those off, but just for your information. When I've got that done, I just need to click on finish. Now, like before, I have my configuration, I have my data. This contains, I think it's 5 emails, might be 6, I can't exactly remember. So I'm going to copy that data file for later. If I go into here, I've got my resources. So I've got my data mapper and my template. I've also got my workflow, which I'll open up now. Now, as the workflow opens up, you'll see it's a very, very simple process. But before I go into the process, I just need to show another part of the workflow. So in the workspace, unlike the other ones, there is an additional folder called delivery notes. Excuse me. So in the delivery notes folder, I have a number of PDFs, and these PDFs are going to be dynamically picked up based on data values and attached to the email. So that's what this folder exists for in the workspace file. If I go to my input folder, that's where I need to drop my data when I'm ready, but we'll come back to that in a sec. So I drop my data in my input folder. I extract from that data the information I need to create my email content and to drive my dynamic attachments. And then in my email output, you can see it's choosing the template. It's got the email information passed through, and that obviously is as much as we need to worry about. All I therefore have to do is to publish this to the services, like all of the other ones, and then I can simply run this live. Minimize the file. Drop this into the hot folder. I've lost my data, so I need to go back and get it. That's a Windows thing. So copy my data, back to my workspace, into my input folder, and paste. Now this data has disappeared, and the process will now go off and produce and send those emails. So what I'm going to do now is switch to my email client so that you can see the result. Okay, so here we are. This is my email box, and as you can see, I have 5 emails, and as I select each one, you can see that the name of the email recipient is changing, the reference numbers inside. This has all come from the sample data. They've got a static PDF attached to them, plus also a dynamic PDF that came from that folder. If I select to the next one, Ola changes to Carol, Carol changes to Rich, Rich changes to Radcliffe, and so on. If I want to open up this document, you can see that it's a PDF, and In this case, it's a PDF, which is a delivery note with a signature. So again, that's demonstrating very simply how to combine the wizard in order to produce a workflow for email. And then, of course, you can use those resources to uncover more about how it works. Okay, so we're back at the Create Project page for the last time. This time, we're going to scroll down to the bottom and we're going to uncover the final project wizard, which is by far the most complex one, and some would say the one that contains more value, but nonetheless, let's take a look. So what we need to do is we need to click on the icon to start the project wizard menu. Now here, most of the parameters are the same, i.e. you've got the send templates and resources to workflow. You've also got your project folder, but you've now got a few more parameters that need to be explained slightly. So the first thing is the host. This basically detected the IP address on my machine, but I want to change that to localhost just to be sure that it's running local. And I know, and so you know by listening to me, that we need to basically point the capture on the go process at the workflow server. So http://localhost port, colon 1990 is the URL back to our workflow server. At the same time, in order to do this, I'm going to need a repository for my capture on the go license and a password and a email address for my capture on the go account. And you're going to need one too. Now, if you have one as a partner, then you know what to do. If you don't have one and you're a customer, then if you've got Planet Press Connect or Press Connect, then included with that is a free license of capture on the go for 12 months for 3 different users. So if you go onto the Web Access Manager, you can actually request those usernames and licenses, and you will then get the information you need to fill out these boxes. The other thing, and it's very important, you may notice the little note under send templates and resources to workflow, and that's there for a particular reason, because when you're communicating from, for example, a mobile, which may be in your hand, to your computer, the computer and the mobile need to be able to talk to each other. And sometimes your network infrastructure may block certain ports or may not be able to reach localhost. So whatever you do, you need to give some consideration before that, before things don't seem to be working. It's really important that you understand and take some time to make sure that the IP address instead of localhost is used to match the network that your mobile is on, so that the two devices can talk together. Now, if you're like me, you can do a little bit of cheating. I'm using the Windows 10 version of Capture on the Go, and that basically means I don't need to worry about an external device because it's running again on my local host machine. So it's a really good way of doing this. Important to say that with Windows 10, there might be a small change you have to make to enable localhost operation with Windows 10, but again, there's articles on how to do that. For now, I've got my network parameters set up. I'm fairly sure everything's working, and all I have to do is to click Finish. Now, I'm waiting for my folder to pop up in the normal way, and all I have to do to trigger everything is take my sample data. I'm only using this sample data file here because basically I know that's the one that the process uses. This data file is for another part that we don't need to worry about today. The resources are there as usual. You've got lots of data mappers and templates for both the timesheet form that operates in the Capture on the Go app and also the timesheet report, which is going to produce a PDF of the data returned from the app. So once I've done that, I just need to start my workflow as before. Okay, so once the workflow is loaded, we're going to go through the processes. These ones are a lot more complex, and as I said, there's a lot more value in them. So the first thing to point out is that this process requires 4 individual processes. The first one deploys the form to the mobile device. The second one basically serves the form. What I mean by that is the Capture on the Go app on your mobile will make a request to the workflow server to get the form. So this process responds to that request, goes and picks it up by loading an external file from the disk, all things being equal, and it sends it back to the user. The third process then captures the data. So when the user has the form and they fill it out and they click submit, this process is the one that gets triggered when they click the submit button in the form, and that results in a file being written into an output file on disk. Now, writing a file to disk doesn't take very long, which means this process is very responsive. The final process is the one that basically picks up the XML file and uses that to produce output in 3 different formats. One is in JSON format for those that like JSON. One is XML format for those that like XML. So this is the data version of what was returned by the user. And then on top of that, we use the all-in-one plugin to produce a PDF to put the PDF in the same folder. So we're going to get a JSON file, an XML file, and a PDF file for all responses coming back from the tablet. So what does that all mean in practice? Well, let's take a look. As before, we're going to publish the service, and then I know this process is running in the background. Once that's set up and running, I'm just going to minimize this folder. I'm going to get my sample data to trigger the process. Go to my workspace, go to my input folder, and paste my file there. Now, whilst that's going on, I want to bring up my app. So here you can see my app, and it's the Windows 10 version, and I'm going to look at my repository, and you can already see some documents have started to arrive. And if I basically refresh this, you'll see more documents are going to arrive. So at this point, I just want to point out that the documents themselves are not yet here, right? What I'm looking at is a document metadata, if you like. So this is basically our server telling us that a number of documents have been created, and I have the metadata that tells you they're waiting for you, but the document itself is still sitting on my workflow server. So if I select one of these documents, you can see it allows me to download it. You can see also the metadata down here. This is all the information that's stored in the cloud, if you will. So once that information is here, to download it, I click the button. But the download will come from my workflow server, in this case my local host, directly to my app. So the document itself, and therefore the data, doesn't touch the cloud. So I've downloaded it, which means I can now open it, and now you can see a form which is pre-populated with the information from my sample data, and I can now use this to type in some meaningful information for my system. So this is me doing some work on analysis for 4 hours. This is me doing some work on installation for 8 hours, and no prizes for thinking what I'm going to type. This is me doing some more work on user training. So basically 12 hours. So once I've done this, I can add more rows if I need to, but I've got 3, that's plenty. I can now do a signature, right? So imagine this is a proof of delivery or requires something to sign. Now, I have a bit of a weird mouse, so I'm not particularly good at doing this with this mouse, so we're going to try. Not too shabby, but not the best. Anyway, there you go. So I have my signature, and obviously this can be any form. This one is for the wizard is a timesheet. So now when I click submit, you have to be quick. When I click submit, this screen will disappear and it will show you the status of the document, which will go orange to green. So ready? Orange, green. What happened? Well, when I click submit, the data from the form, just the data, went back to the workflow server. The server acknowledged receipt of that data, which is why the app is showing that as a green tick. And ultimately, that's the entire workflow. I can go back and do more forms, but I won't, because I want to minimize the time you waste listening to me. So I'm going to minimize this, and I'm now going to look at my output folder of my workspace. Now, when I do that, I've got 3 files. There's my JSON data. I won't open it up because it won't mean much to me. But what will mean something to me is my PDF file. Now, when I open up my PDF file, you can see it's a document, a formatted document from the data that comes back and has all the information that I typed in with my signature, and that, as you can see, is a demonstration of a timesheet report created directly from a mobile Capture on the Go application produced from the Project Wizard. Now, there's a huge amount of learning for this one, but as I said right at the beginning, even advanced users might find themselves learning a lot about how we achieve these sort of things. Okay, so that's me done. That's the end of the 6 project wizards that we've included with Connect 2019.1. I hope you believe that they add value for new users, novice users, and advanced users. All I can say is they're there for you now. Please use them. Please investigate what goes on within the templates, the data models, the data presets, and also the processes and workflow. So good luck, and maybe I'll talk to some of you soon.